In this video, we will show you how to replace your fuel pump assembly on this Dodge Ram 1500. This will be located inside of your fuel tank. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Make sure you're in a safe area to work on your vehicle because we will have to drop the fuel tank to be able to gain access to the fuel pump and assembly. Before we start taking down the fuel tank, let's disconnect our negative battery terminal. We'll do that by using a 13mm. We can loosen this mounting nut just enough that we can remove the terminal end from the battery. Now once you have that disconnected, just a quick inspection for corrosion. We'll set that aside. Now we're going to have to depressurize the fuel system. To do that, have a look along the driver's side upper engine and you're going to find your fuel rail. On that fuel rail, we're looking for this Schrader valve. Now I'm just going to put a rag right down in this area. What we need to do now is continue on by gently pressing directly in the center of this Schrader valve right here, and typically you will see fuel making its way out. We'll make sure we're in a well-ventilated area when we do so. See a little bit of fuel making its way out of there. Typically I do just cover it with the rag when I do that, but I wanted to show you exactly what kind of pressure is behind there. It's not necessarily very much, but it is something that you want to pay attention to. We'll just clean up our mess in this area. Now let's make our way back to where the fuel cap's going to be located. We'll open up our fuel door, locate that fuel cap, turn that counterclockwise to disconnect it. A quick inspection of the seal. If it looks like the seal's dry rotted and cracked, you definitely want to replace your fuel cap. This one looks fine. We'll set it aside for now. Continuing from here, we have to safely raise and support the vehicle so we can make our way underneath. Now in this area is where you're going to find your fuel filler neck, and we also have this other tube making its way up along the side here. We're going to disconnect each of the two hoses from this. We'll start with the smaller one. For each of these clamps, I'm using a 7mm. Now since we are working with fuel, we are not using any electric tools. We do not want any sparks of any sort in this area. This is extremely important to remember. Slide this clamp out of the way a little bit. Now we can start dislodging those two hoses. After you've removed the clamps from the area, you can use a small hose pick to break them free from their tubing. After that, just go ahead and slowly pull them out of place. A quick inspection to see if they're dry rotted and cracked, in which case they'd have to be replaced. Otherwise, continue on. There we are. Soft and pliable, definitely not torn, worn, or damaged. This one looks fine. Let's continue on to the larger hose now. Same process. Once that clamp's out of the way, you can just slide that right off of there. Now I've applied upward support underneath our fuel tank. We have it on a jack, so I can easily lower this down to an area that I can gain access along the top. Before we can start lowering it, you're going to find you have two fuel tank straps that we have to dislodge. There's one along the forward side of the fuel tank and one just along the rear, right along here. Let's start removing our fuel tank straps by removing our two 15mm headed mounting nuts, one for each. Now we should be able to take hold of the straps and gently pull them down. I'm just using a pick. You can use a screwdriver, a pry bar, whatever you need to get this down and out of position. Now we're going to slowly start bringing the fuel tank down to an area we can gain access. We'll be careful for those fuel tank straps. There we are. Now we're just going to resituate those fuel tank straps so they are not getting caught on our rearward drive shaft, and we can start lowering down the fuel tank. Keep in mind there is fuel lines leading to the top of the fuel tank here. We only want to come down far enough we can gain access to the top. Now that I have this lowered down far enough, I'm over towards the rear drive shaft of the vehicle, and this is where we can make our way up above the fuel tank to gain access to our fuel lines and wiring harness. Before we start disconnecting anything, it's possible to have a whole bunch of miscellaneous debris in this area. We'll use some compressed air. Let's start disconnecting our fuel lines. I'll be starting right up along this area. For this fuel line, we just want to go ahead and squeeze on this little locking area. It's 2 small ears. When you squeeze those in, you should be able to slide this up and out of place. After that, a quick inspection. There we go. Now, as you can see, the 2 locking ears for that locking tab are still attached to the line leading to the fuel tank. That's okay. This will press up into position. We just want to make sure it's not dry rotted, cracked, or broken. This is a necessary piece. If your line does not lock, you will find you have a fuel leak. Now let's continue on a little bit over towards the driver's side here. We have another fuel line leading into this area. Same process. Go ahead and squeeze in on the 2 locking ears and we'll pull this out of place. Now let's move from that area. Right next to it, you're going to find an electrical connector. To disconnect it, it has a small red locking tab that you have to dislodge, and then you can press in on the tab located just behind it. After that, we'll just go ahead and pull this right out of place, a quick inspection for corrosion. To dislodge this, I'm just using a small pocket screwdriver. You can use pretty much whatever you have as a small prying device. Just want to pull that tab away. Right here's the next tab that we're going to squeeze in on, and we can dislodge this. If needed, you can remove your fuel tank straps from the vehicle's frame. For that, you just want to find the strap where it connects to the frame itself, find the slot in the frame for the strap to fit out of, and then just twist it as needed and slide it out of position. A quick inspection of the strap as you continue on. Repeat the process for the other one. Now we can start lowering the fuel tank down and out of position. Now I have the fuel tank in a safe area. We're going to continue on with some more compressed air, attempting to clean up around the top area where the fuel pump assembly is. Now, before we start removing our locking ring, there's one more fuel line that we have to disconnect from this area. For this one, we're just going to squeeze on the 2 ears. There's one up along the top, one down on the bottom, and we'll pull this out of place. Quick inspection, we'll temporarily set that aside. Continuing on, we're going to remove that locking ring. If you have one of these specialty tools, you can use that. Otherwise, you could use a brass punch and a rubber mallet and tap along these ears, turning this counterclockwise. After removing the locking ring, a close inspection to make sure it's not cracked or damaged in any way. This one looks fine. Now we want to have a collection receptacle so when we pull this up and out of place, we have a safe place to put it. There could be fuel in this area. Continue lifting this up. We'll remove our float and set this aside. Let's prepare our fuel pump assembly for installation. We're going to start with our rubber grommet here. That's going to slide all the way up the body of the fuel pump assembly up to the top mounting point. Slide that all the way down there. We want to be careful for any wiring harnesses. You don't need to squish anything inside this area. You can see that it's completely up against the base all the way around. Now let's continue on in this area. This is where your level sensor will go. We're going to start by removing this black locking tab. For this, you can use a small prying device. I'm using a small screwdriver. It has a couple locking ears. You just want to go ahead and press those inward and press it up and out of position. Let's pop that right off of there. Continuing on, it's time for the float rod here. We're going to take this and bring it right into where the level sensor is. You can see that circular port for it to press into. Now continuing on, we want to align it with its locking clips here and we'll press it into position. We got an audible click there. We'll reinstall our black locking tab here. Line it up, press it in. Just double check, make sure that's secured in place. Now that we have that up and out of there, let's pay attention up along the top port here. You should find that you have a small rubber seal. We'll dispose of that. Continuing on, we'll clean and inspect this area. Okay, let's get ready to install that fuel pump assembly. We'll get this into position. We'll start with the float, start bringing it down. Now we're going to align the seal with the mounting port up along the top here. Should want to align fairly easily and press it down into position. Just make sure it's not curved up in any areas. Now as we start lining this up, we're pressing it down into the proper position. We want to make sure that we have the area for our lines properly aligned. This one's obviously going to connect in on this side, so we'll just make sure we have it lined up properly. Continue on gently pressing it into position, confirming that the seal is properly seated all the way around. If it came off kilter, you might find that you have a vapor leak in this area, which can cause a running condition or a check engine light. Continuing on, we have our locking ring. We'll start getting this in position here. Going to turn this counterclockwise until I feel it starting to slide downward a little bit. Once you feel as though you have your locking ring down as far as possible, fully tightened, go ahead and take hold of the fuel pump assembly, attempt to give it a wiggle. It should not move, spin, or lift up in any way. Now let's get this line on here. Press it in, give it a wiggle, make sure that's secured. Now we're back underneath the vehicle with the fuel tank. We'll start bringing this up into position. At this point, we're up high enough we can reconnect our electrical connector. Once we press it in and listen for a click, you also want to lock it in with this red locking tab. Let's keep bringing this up now so we can continue on to our two fuel lines. Once you're up high enough, we can get those lines in position here. Just line them up, press them in, listen for a click. Let's get that next one on there. Now that we have both those lines attached, let's make sure that we have both of our fuel tank straps in place on the frame before we continue going up any further. There's the forward strap. Repeat the process for the rearward strap if you did happen to remove it. Before you fully raise the fuel tank all the way up to the body of the vehicle, make sure you press it all the way up against the frame, outward as far as possible. Make sure you have your strap alignment points properly aligned. We'll continue on raising this up. You can move it forward or rearward as necessary. Start getting the strap in position here. We'll start on the hardware, repeat the process for the other mounting strap. Once both of them are started, you can snug this up. Now we have both started, we can snug them up. Once they're snug, the torque for these is 30 foot-pounds. Remove support from under your fuel tank. And now we're going to make our way up to our two fuel hoses. We'll start with the larger hose. This one's a little bit more difficult to flex and get into position. Once it is in position, go ahead and reinstall the clamp. We're pressing it on there as far as possible, right back into its original positioning here, confirming that the hose is not kinked in any way. If your hose is kinked, you're going to find you have a hard time filling up your fuel system. Okay, so right there the clamp's bottomed out. I'm only taking it a tiny bit further. If you find when you're tightening the clamp, it skips on you, you have to replace the clamp. It's not going to hold tightly anymore. Once again, we're sliding that on there as far as possible. Double check for kinks. Reinstall your clamp. Make sure it's nice and tight. Right there's bottomed out. Tiny bit further. Double check, make sure they're both secured in place. After completing everything underneath the vehicle, we can make our way back out and we're at the fuel filler neck. Go ahead and reinstall your fuel cap. After that, we'll make our way back under the hood. Continuing on, we'll reconnect our negative battery terminal, but before doing so, you want to make sure you have no fuel or vapors in the area. It can create a spark. We'll press that down on there and tighten up the mounting nut. Double check, make sure that's properly secured. Okay friend, we finished our installation. The next thing you need to do is go ahead and start up the vehicle, let it run for a short while, make sure you have no leaks, no running condition, no check engine light. Close the hood, take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.